I still remember that morning so clearly, as if it were engraved in my soul because it began with a pleasant anticipation. But that anticipation was shattered the moment my son said there was no place for me at Christmas dinner. And when I found out that his wife's parents had been invited, it devastated me completely. What I did next shocked everyone. Before continuing, write in the comments the city you are watching from so that I can see how far my story has spread. Christmas was always sacred to me, not only for the religion I still held quietly in my heart, but because it was the one tradition I could count on to bring my family together. Every year, no matter what had happened during the long months of work and quarrels and disappointments, I knew that on Christmas Eve I would sit at my son Daniel's table, watch my grandchildren unwrap the presents I had chosen with care, and feel for one evening that life had not abandoned me to solitude. This year felt special, almost destined to be brighter than the ones before, because only 3 months earlier I had helped Daniel and his wife Julia buy their new apartment. It wasn't a palace, but for young people with 2 children and a third one Julia sometimes hinted about, it was a step up, a dream fulfilled. I had sold some of my old shares in a company I had once worked for, shares I had originally bought not for myself, but to secure Daniel's future. And when the day of signing came, I wrote the last check with trembling hands, telling myself that this was what fathers were for, to help their sons, to ensure they never carried the kind of financial burdens that had bent my own back for decades. Daniel had thanked me then, Julia too, though her smile had the kind of polite edge I could never quite trust. But gratitude or not, I had given them the apartment, and in return I expected nothing but the joy of being part of their lives. I imagined myself sitting in their new living room, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon cookies filling the air, the children running around in excitement, and Daniel finally looking at me not as a tired old man, but as the father who had carried him through life's storms. That image kept me going during the cold November evenings when the house I now lived in alone seemed too large, too quiet, and too filled with echoes of the past. So that morning, with the calendar already pointing toward December, I picked up the phone to call Daniel. The purpose of my call was simple enough. I wanted to know what gifts would make my grandchildren happy. I had a tradition of asking every year, and Daniel usually rattled off a few ideas without thinking too hard, leaving me the joy of shopping and wrapping. The phone rang longer than usual before his voice answered, hurried and distracted, as though I had interrupted something. "Dad?" "Yeah, what's up?" "I was thinking about Christmas," I said cheerfully, though already his tone made me uneasy. "I wanted to ask what the kids are hoping for this year. I'd like to surprise them." For a moment, silence. Then a sound of papers rustling. "Oh, right. Well, actually, Julia made a list. Hold on." I could hear him walking, the echo of his steps, the muffled voice of Julia in the background. When he returned, his tone was brighter, rehearsed. "Okay, so they'd love new bikes, some Lego sets, a tablet for Clara, and a few books. Julia's also written down clothes, sizes, jackets, shoes, that kind of stuff. I'll send you the list by email. You can just, you know, order it online and mail it to us." "Mail it?" I repeated, frowning though he couldn't see me. But I was planning to bring the gifts myself, as always. "It's Christmas, Daniel." There was a pause, too long, and then he said it, quickly, as if ripping off a bandage. "Dad, listen. About Christmas. We're not really expecting you this year. The apartment is, well, it's not that big, and with the kids it gets crowded. We just don't have enough room for everyone." For a second I didn't understand. My heart seemed to stop, and the receiver felt heavy in my hand. "Not enough room?" I asked slowly. "But I've always come." "Every year since you married. You know that." "I know," he said, and there was something defensive in his voice. But this year's different. It's just complicated. Julia thought it would be better if we kept it small, just us and the kids. We don't want to overwhelm them. I sat in silence, staring at the wall of my study where the photographs of Daniel's childhood still hung, each frame carefully dusted, each memory kept alive only by me. He was waiting for me to say something, but my mouth was dry. Finally, I managed. I see. Well, if that's what you've decided. Thanks for understanding, Dad, he said quickly, too quickly, as though he was afraid I might change my mind and argue. And don't worry, the kids will love the presents. Just send them by mail, and then he was gone, leaving me with the sound of the dial tone and a weight in my chest I could hardly bear. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. No room for me. Not enough space in the apartment I had paid for. For the first time in years, I felt truly old. Not because of my body, though my knees ached and my hands shook when I poured myself a glass of water, but because I realized I was no longer seen as essential. I was optional. A presence they could erase with a simple excuse. Yet even then, even in that moment of humiliation, I clung to hope. Perhaps Julia had insisted. Perhaps Daniel was caught between his wife and his father. Perhaps it was only a misunderstanding, and in a week or two they would call and say, "Of course, Dad, we want you here." That hope, fragile and trembling, kept me from collapsing entirely. But deep inside, a seed of doubt had been planted, and I knew that Christmas, which had always been my anchor, was about to become the storm that tore my family apart. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time with the phone still in my hand, as if waiting for Daniel to call back and laugh, to tell me it had been a joke, that of course there was room for me at the Christmas table. But the silence in the house was absolute, broken only by the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall. That sound, steady and merciless, reminded me that time does not pause even when a man's heart feels frozen. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. They were young, the apartment was new, and perhaps Julia was anxious about hosting too many people for the first holiday in their new home. Maybe she wanted to show off her new place to her friends or keep the day intimate. I tried to convince myself of these things, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was no justification strong enough for excluding me. Not after all these years, not after everything I had done for them. Still, I refused to let bitterness consume me, not yet. If I could not be there in person, I would at least make sure my grandchildren felt my love. That thought gave me purpose in the days that followed. I sat at my desk with Daniel's emailed list printed out beside me. It wasn't just a few suggestions, it was a full catalog, as if I had been turned into nothing more than a delivery service. Bicycles, a tablet, books, jackets, shoes, even a specific brand of sneakers Clara had been asking for. The list was long and expensive, and as I read it, I couldn't help wondering if Julia had compiled it more with her own convenience in mind than with the children's actual wishes. Yet I ordered every item, one by one. I spent hours on different websites, comparing prices, ensuring the models were exactly as specified, adding gift wrapping where possible. It was not only about giving gifts, but about preserving the tradition, about making sure the children still felt my presence even if their parents wanted to erase me from the picture. When I clicked Place Order for the last item, I felt a strange mix of pride and humiliation. Pride because I could still provide. Humiliation because it was the only way left for me to be part of their Christmas. When the packages arrived at my house a week later, I spent an entire evening arranging them neatly, inspecting the wrapping, attaching small cards on which I had written in my careful, slightly trembling hand, "With love from Grandpa Mario." I imagined the children's joy when they opened them, the way Clara's eyes would sparkle at the sight of the tablet, the way little Leo would shout when he saw the shiny new bicycle. Those images warmed me, though the warmth was tinged with sadness. The next morning, I took the packages to the post office. The clerk looked at me curiously as I brought in box after box, filling out forms, making sure each one would arrive before Christmas. "Big family?" she asked kindly. "Grandchildren," I said simply, forcing a smile. When the last package disappeared behind the counter, I felt a sense of relief, as though I had fulfilled my duty. I walked home slowly, the cold December air biting at my cheeks, my cane tapping against the sidewalk. At home, the house felt emptier than ever, but at least I could picture the children's happiness, and that was enough to carry me through the quiet evenings. Christmas came. I spent it alone, heating up a small turkey breast and opening a bottle of wine I had been saving. I set the table with care, though no one was there to share it. I turned on the radio, letting the carols play softly in the background, and tried to imagine I was sitting at Daniel's table as in years past. I raised a glass in a silent toast. To family, even if they forget you. The day passed slowly, a mixture of nostalgia and sorrow. When night fell, I went to bed early, convincing myself that at least the children had enjoyed themselves, that my gifts had brought them joy, and that one day, when they were older, they would remember their grandfather's love even if their parents tried to hide it. It was 2 days later when I saw the photos. I had never been one for social media, but Julia was active online, posting about the children almost daily. I only looked occasionally, usually when someone from the neighborhood mentioned seeing pictures of my grandchildren. That afternoon, I was drinking tea and staring at the snow outside when Esther, my neighbor, mentioned in passing that Julia had uploaded adorable Christmas photos. Curious, I opened my laptop and typed Julia's name into the search bar. There they were, bright, colorful photographs of Clara and Leo, smiling from ear to ear as they posed with their new gifts. Clara holding the tablet, Leo straddling his shiny new bike, both children surrounded by neatly wrapped packages and festive decorations in the new apartment. My heart swelled at first. I was glad to see them happy. But then I read the captions. Look at the joy on their faces. So grateful to Mom and Dad for spoiling the kids again. This year, the best grandparents ever. Another photo. Clara couldn't believe it when she unwrapped the tablet from her grandparents. Thank you, Mom and Dad. You always know what she loves. And another, Leo will be riding his new bike all spring. Couldn't have asked for more thoughtful gifts from my parents. I froze. My hands trembled on the keyboard, and I had to remove my glasses and wipe them, convinced I had read it wrong. But no, it was clear. Julia had taken every one of my gifts, gifts I had chosen, ordered, paid for, and mailed, and credited them to her parents. As if I did not exist. As if my love, my effort, my presence in my grandchildren's lives had been erased with a few careless words. I stared at the screen for a long time, the images blurring as tears filled my eyes. My grandchildren were smiling, their eyes alight with joy, but the joy had been stolen from me. In their young minds, would they now believe that it was Julia's parents who cared enough to buy them these gifts? Would they think of me as the absent figure, the grandfather who hadn't bothered, who hadn't even sent a single box? The pain was sharper than anything I had felt in years. It was not only betrayal, it was erasure. To be excluded from the table was one thing, but to have my very love redirected, credited to others, was unbearable. For the rest of the day, I wandered around the house aimlessly, unable to focus on anything. I tried to distract myself by repairing an old clock in my workshop, but my hands shook too much to handle the delicate gears. I sat in my armchair, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I had done to deserve such cruelty. Anger simmered beneath the sadness. I had given them so much, my money, my time, my loyalty. I had helped Daniel buy that very apartment where the Christmas tree now stood, where my gifts had been photographed and misattributed. And what had I received in return? A phone call telling me there was no room. A series of captions that erased me from my grandchildren's Christmas. Yet even as anger burned inside me, I did not know what to do. Should I confront Daniel? Should I call Julia and demand an explanation? Should I post a comment under the photos telling the truth? The thought of airing such grievances publicly made me shudder. It was not my way to humiliate my own son, not in front of strangers. But the alternative was silence, and silence felt like surrender. That night, I could not sleep. I lay awake, listening to the wind against the windows, my mind replaying the images again and again. Clara holding the tablet, Leo on his bike, Julia's smug captions praising her parents. I imagined the children thanking the wrong grandparents, their little voices filled with gratitude for people who had done nothing. The injustice gnawed at me until my chest ached. By morning, I was exhausted, but the question remained, what should I do? To act hastily might drive Daniel further away, and I could not bear to lose what little connection remained. But to remain silent was to accept being erased, to accept that my role in my grandchildren's lives could be rewritten by someone else's lies. I walked through the house that day, touching the objects that held the weight of my life. The photos of Daniel as a boy, the furniture I had bought piece by piece, the old radio that had filled our Christmases with carols when he was little. Everything I had done had been for him, for his future. And now I was nothing but a shadow, an inconvenience. The dilemma consumed me. I did not yet know how to respond, but I knew one thing. Something inside me had shifted. The wound was too deep, the insult too great to be ignored. Whether I acted tomorrow or in a month, the moment would come when they would understand what it meant to discard a father so easily. For now, I waited, silent but watchful, like a man holding his breath before the storm. The days after Christmas moved like heavy clouds across the sky, slow and gray, each one indistinguishable from the other. I tried to busy myself with small tasks, fixing an old lamp in the workshop, sweeping the snow from the porch, answering Esther's questions about how I had spent the holidays. But nothing eased the weight in my chest. Every time I sat down, the images from Julia's online posts returned to me, vivid and merciless. Clara beaming at her tablet, Leo with his bike, Julia smiling proudly beside them, and the captions thanking her parents for the generosity that had been mine. At first, I tried to convince myself not to act in haste. Perhaps I should let it go, I thought. Perhaps my silence would be a dignified answer, showing that I was above their pettiness. But dignity is a fragile armor when betrayal gnaws at the heart, and by the third evening I could no longer bear it. I took the phone from its cradle and dialed Daniel's number. My hands trembled as I held it to my ear, my breath coming short as though I were about to step onto a battlefield. The call connected after several rings. "Dad?" His voice was casual, distracted, as if nothing weighed on his conscience. "Daniel," I said, my tone heavier than I intended. "I need to ask you something." "Sure," he replied quickly. "What's up?" I closed my eyes, summoning the strength to speak the words. "Why were Julia's parents there for Christmas when you told me there wasn't enough room?" The silence that followed was brief but telling. He hadn't expected the question, and his pause gave him away before he even spoke. "Dad, what are you talking about?" he asked finally, his voice tightening. "You must have misunderstood. Julia's parents weren't there. You're imagining things." A bitter laugh escaped me, one I hadn't planned. "Don't lie to me, Daniel." I saw the photos. Julia herself posted them, photos of her parents with my grandchildren, holding the gifts I sent, and the captions, thanking them for presents they didn't buy. Another silence. Longer this time. I could hear him breathing, could almost picture him standing in his apartment, his hand running through his hair, his eyes darting to Julia for guidance. The silence told me more than words. "You saw the photos?" he asked at last, his voice low. "Yes," I said firmly. "Every one of them. The truth is there for anyone to see. You told me there wasn't enough room, and yet there was room for Julia's parents. You told me not to come, while they sat at the table where I should have been." Still he said nothing. I could hear faint sounds in the background, Julia's voice, perhaps, or the children laughing. But Daniel himself remained mute. He had no defense, no excuse strong enough to erase the evidence. "You let them take credit for my gifts," I continued, my voice trembling with anger. "You let them erase me from my grandchildren's Christmas. And you stood by in silence while Julia told the world that her parents had given everything Dad," he began. But his voice faltered. "Do you deny it?" I pressed. Another pause, and then, softly, "No." It was a small word, but it shattered what remained of my faith in him. He had nothing left to say because the lie had been exposed, naked and undeniable. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us like a canyon, impossible to cross. Finally, I said, "Do you have any idea what that feels like? To see my love for my grandchildren erased with a single sentence? To be told there was no room for me, only to watch another man sit in my chair, eat at my table, hold my grandchildren?" "Dad, it wasn't like that," he tried weakly. Julia just thought, Julia thought, I interrupted sharply, that I was expendable, that her parents deserved the honor of being grandparents while I was to be shoved aside like an unwanted guest. And you, my son, let it happen. His breathing grew heavier, as if he were struggling to contain his own emotions. "You don't understand, Dad. It's complicated." "No," I said firmly. "It's simple. You lied to me. And now, the lie is written in photographs for all to see." The weight of my words pressed down on him, and for the first time Daniel had nothing to answer. The silence on the line was thick, suffocating, filled with everything he could not say because the truth had already been spoken. I waited, giving him one last chance, one final opening to redeem himself. But no apology came, no explanation, no attempt to repair the damage, only silence. "Very well," I said at last, my voice calm though my hands trembled. "If this is the path you've chosen, then so be it. But know this, I am not blind and I am not powerless. One day, Daniel, you will understand what it means to discard a father." I hung up before he could reply. The room felt colder after the call, as though the very walls had absorbed the chill of betrayal. I sat in my chair for a long time, staring at the dark window, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat. I had confronted him, stripped away the lie, and left him with nothing but silence. Yet the victory felt hollow, for the wound remained. Over the following days, I turned the conversation over in my mind again and again. His silence haunted me more than any words could have. If he had shouted, if he had defended Julia, if he had even tried to justify himself, I might have found a way to argue. But silence. Silence was admission. Silence was guilt. And it told me that he had made his choice. I thought of Clara and Leo, of how they would grow up believing their mother's parents were the ones who loved them most, the ones who provided for them, while their real grandfather was nothing but a distant figure. I thought of the apartment I had helped buy, the foundation of their new life, and how I had been excluded from it like a stranger. Each day my anger grew sharper, my resolve harder. I did not yet know what I would do, but I knew I could not let this insult pass unanswered. To remain silent was to accept my own erasure, and I would not give them that satisfaction. For now, though, I waited. I waited with the patience of a man who has been wronged and knows that time will deliver an opportunity for justice. And when that moment came, I would be ready. The phone call with Daniel left me shaken in a way that was difficult to describe. It was not the first time he had disappointed me, but it was the first time I truly understood that the bond between us, the bond I had carried and nurtured for decades, no longer held meaning for him. When a son can look his father in the eye, through a phone line, yes, but still, and deny the truth until silence exposes him, then something sacred has already been broken beyond repair. For days, I moved through the house like a ghost, performing the same old routines yet feeling nothing but emptiness. I still rose at 6, still brewed my tea, still walked the icy path to the mailbox and back. But the joy in these small habits had evaporated. I thought of the boy Daniel once was, the boy who had run into my arms when I returned from long shifts, the boy who had once believed that his father could fix anything. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who saw me as a burden, an inconvenience, someone to be hidden away while others took my place. One evening, I sat at my desk and opened the old folder where I kept my financial papers. The shares stared back at me in black and white, numbers and signatures that represented years of sacrifice. They were not enormous in value, but they were steady and reliable, a gift I had once been proud to set aside for Daniel's future. I remembered the day I transferred them, the way I told him, "This is for you, son, to give you stability, to give you freedom." His eyes had lit up then, though whether with gratitude or with calculation I could not now be sure. I thought of those shares now as chains binding me to a man who no longer respected me. Why should he continue to benefit from the sweat of my labor, from the long nights I had endured, from the sacrifices I had made, when he could not even offer me a seat at his Christmas table? Respect is the only true currency a father craves from his children, and when that respect is withheld, love begins to wither. That night, after hours of pacing, I made my decision. Daniel no longer deserved the shares. The thought filled me first with sorrow, then with an odd sense of liberation. For years I had told myself that everything I owned would one day be his, that my role was only to pass it down, to ensure his comfort and prosperity. But if a son cannot honor his father in life, then why should he inherit anything in death? No, it was time to reclaim what was mine and decide for myself how it would be used. The next morning, I called my broker, an old acquaintance, who still remembered me from better days. He greeted me warmly, asking after my health, making the polite conversation men of finance are trained to deliver. I did not waste time. "I want to sell the shares," I told him firmly. "All of them?" he asked, surprised. "Yes, all of them." There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause that carries more questions than words. "Are you certain?" "They've been a steady investment for you, and—" "I'm certain," I interrupted. "I no longer wish them to be connected to me or to anyone I once considered my heir." He hesitated, then agreed to prepare the paperwork. Within days, the process was complete. I signed the documents with a steady hand, feeling each stroke of the pen like a cut through the past. When it was done, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace. The shares were mine again, not Daniel's. I had severed the rope he had tied around me, the rope he had used not to honor me, but to strangle the last remnants of respect between us. Yet peace was short-lived. Julia continued to post photographs online, each one a deliberate sting. There she was, standing proudly beside Clara and Leo as they played with the toys I had bought, her captions once again attributing the gifts to her own parents. "Couldn't ask for better grandparents," she wrote beneath a photo of Leo riding the bike in the park, her father walking beside him as though he had been the one to bring it into their lives. Another showed Clara curled up on the couch with the tablet, Julia's mother smiling behind her. So lucky to have such thoughtful grandparents who always know what she needs. Each post was like a knife twisting deeper. It wasn't only that my gifts had been stolen from me, it was that Julia seemed to delight in rubbing salt into the wound. It wasn't enough to exclude me. She wanted the world to see that I was irrelevant, erased, replaced by her parents. At first, I tried not to look. I told myself that if I ignored the posts, they could not hurt me. But word spread quickly in small towns, and neighbors who knew me too well would mention them casually. "Saw the photos of your grandchildren online, Mario," Esther said one morning. "They look so happy with their gifts. Your son's in-laws must really dote on them." I nodded stiffly, forcing a smile, but inside my stomach twisted. Even Esther, who had known me for years, who had seen the packages I had mailed with my own hands, had been fooled by Julia's performance. The humiliation was complete. At night, lying awake in the silence of my house, I replayed the images in my mind. I saw Julia's smug smile, Daniel's silence, my grandchildren's innocent joy directed at the wrong people. I thought of the shares now sold, the money no longer tied to Daniel's future. That decision brought me some comfort, but the bitterness of being erased remained. One evening, unable to bear it any longer, I printed out several of the photos and laid them across my desk. I studied them carefully, like evidence in a trial. In each one, Julia positioned her parents at the center, her captions carefully crafted to praise them while I remained absent. Not a single mention of me, not a single acknowledgement that I existed. It was deliberate, systematic. She was rewriting history in real time, and Daniel allowed it. I picked up one photo and stared at Julia's mother holding Leo's shoulders as he grinned at the camera. The caption read, "Grandma always knows how to make him smile." I whispered aloud, my voice breaking, "That's my bike. That's my gift. That smile belongs to me." The words echoed in the empty room, pathetic and powerless. I set the photo down and covered my face with my hands. Tears came, hot and unstoppable, not only for the betrayal, but for the realization that I had lost more than just a Christmas. I had lost the role of grandfather itself. Over the following weeks, the pattern continued. Julia posted constantly, her captions growing bolder, as though she enjoyed parading my humiliation before me. Daniel remained silent, never calling, never correcting her lies. My grandchildren laughed in the photos, unaware of the games being played around them, their innocence weaponized against me. But within me, something was hardening. The sadness began to transform into resolve. They could erase me from their photos, from their captions, from their stories, but they could not erase the truth of who I was, nor could they control what I chose to do with what remained of my life. The shares were gone from Daniel's grasp. That was only the beginning. For now, I endured, watching quietly, waiting for the moment when my silence would no longer be passive but strategic. They believed they had humiliated me, broken me. They did not yet know that I had only just begun to fight back. For days after selling the shares, I sat in silence trying to convince myself that the matter was closed. The bond between father and son had been torn, yes, but perhaps that was simply the way of things. Some fathers die respected, others die forgotten, and perhaps I had landed in the latter category. I told myself I could live with that. But what I could not live with, what kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the emptiness of the house, was the thought of my grandchildren growing up without knowing me. Clara's laughter, Leo's boundless energy, even the quiet way Clara would hide behind her books when she was nervous. Those were parts of my life that gave it meaning. To lose them entirely was to lose the last reason for my heart to keep beating. Daniel and Julia could choose to disrespect me. That was their decision. But Clara and Leo had no say in it. They were children, innocent, their hearts open to love. If I allowed Julia's lies to become their truth, then one day they would look back and believe their grandfather had never cared. That was a future I could not allow. So one cold morning, As the snow lay heavy on the rooftops and smoke rose from chimneys in the neighborhood, I made my decision. I would not wait for permission. I would not call to ask if I was welcome. I would not mail boxes or watch strangers take credit for my love. Number. This time, I would go myself. The plan began simply: gifts. Not the kind of practical list Julia might approve of, not the neat catalog she emailed Daniel to pass along to me, but real gifts, the kind that make children's eyes shine. I went to the best toy shop in the city, walking slowly with my cane through aisles that smelled of plastic and fresh cardboard. I chose a model train set that stretched for meters, with tracks and bridges and lights that glowed like magic. I bought a telescope for Clara, remembering the night years ago when she had pointed at the moon and asked me, "Grandpa, do people live up there?" I added a guitar, small enough for Leo's hands but real enough to make music. And then, on impulse, I bought a puppy from a breeder outside town, a fluffy golden retriever with eyes so honest it nearly broke my heart. By the time I was finished, my car was packed so tightly with boxes and bags that I could barely see out the rearview mirror. I drove slowly, the snow crunching beneath the tires, my heart pounding not with fear but with anticipation. For the first time in months, I felt alive. When I arrived at their apartment building, I parked across the street. The windows glowed with warm light, and I could see the faint outline of the Christmas tree still standing in the living room. My hands trembled as I stepped out of the car, loading the first armful of gifts. I rang the bell, the door opened, and Julia stood there, her face freezing into a mask of disbelief. Her eyes darted to the boxes in my arms, then back to me. For a moment, she said nothing. "Good evening," I said calmly, as if I were merely dropping by for tea. "I thought I'd bring something for the children. Mario." Her voice caught. She seemed to be deciding whether to slam the door or call for Daniel. Instead, she stepped aside reluctantly, her politeness forced. "Come in." I entered, my cane tapping against the polished floor. The apartment smelled of pine and cinnamon, still decorated with the remnants of Christmas. Clara and Leo were in the living room, playing quietly. When they saw me, their faces lit up in shock. "Grandpa!" Clara cried, running toward me. She hugged my waist with such force I nearly lost my balance. Leo followed, his small arms wrapping around my legs. The sound of their voices, the feel of their embrace. It was everything I had been starved of. "I brought you some things," I said, smiling. Daniel appeared from the hallway, his face pale. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "I came to see my grandchildren," I answered simply. "Surely there is room for that." Before he could argue, Clara had already pulled one of the boxes from my arms, tearing at the wrapping. Her eyes widened when she saw the telescope. "A real one?" she whispered. "Yes," I said softly. "You can see the moon with it." And maybe even the planet's Leo was opening another package, shouting with joy when he uncovered the train set. "It's huge, Grandpa." "Look at it." Their excitement filled the room, drowning out Daniel's protests. Even Julia, standing stiffly with her arms crossed, could not stop the tide of joy. And then the puppy padded into the apartment, wagging its tail, sniffing curiously. The children squealed, dropping their toys to rush toward it. "A dog! Grandpa got us a dog!" The chaos was immediate. The puppy licking faces, the children laughing, Daniel shouting about responsibility. But in that moment, I felt something no caption or photograph could erase. I was their grandfather, and nothing could take that away. Daniel finally pulled me aside, his voice low and harsh. "Dad, you can't just show up like this. You should have called." "I tried calling," I reminded him. "You lied. You told me there was no room for me, but there was room for Julia's parents. You took my gifts and gave credit to them. If you think I will let my grandchildren grow up believing that lie, you are mistaken." His jaw tightened, but he had no answer. Julia approached, her voice sharper. "This is inappropriate, Mario. You can't undermine us like this. We're their parents." I looked her in the eye. "And I am their grandfather. You may erase me from your photographs, Julia, but you cannot erase me from their hearts." Clara and Leo returned then, tugging at my sleeve, begging me to help them set up the train tracks. Their laughter filled the room again, and for once neither Daniel nor Julia could silence it. I stayed for hours, building the tracks with Leo, helping Clara aim the telescope out the balcony window, watching the puppy curl into her lap. The apartment that had once excluded me now rang with my presence. When it was finally time to leave, Clara clung to me. "Will you come back soon, Grandpa?" I kissed her forehead. "Yes, my dear." As often as I can. Outside, the snow had stopped, and the night was clear. I walked to my car slowly, my heart heavy but proud. I had shocked them, yes. Daniel and Julia had not expected me to appear, had not expected me to reclaim my role. Their faces had betrayed their discomfort, but the children had welcomed me with open arms, and that was all that mattered. As I drove home, I realized something important. I could forgive my son, perhaps, though the wound was deep, but I would never again allow him or his wife to dictate my place in my grandchildren's lives. That right was mine alone, earned not by blood, but by love. And so I returned to my quiet house not as a defeated man, but as a grandfather who had finally remembered his worth. It was a week after my unannounced visit with the gifts when the phone rang one afternoon. I recognized Daniel's number immediately. For a moment, I considered letting it ring out. My son had chosen silence before. What reason did I have to expect that his words now would be any different? Yet curiosity gnawed at me. With a sigh, I lifted the receiver. "Dad," Daniel said, his tone careful, almost rehearsed. "We need to talk." "What about?" I asked flatly. There was a pause. Then, "The shares." "Ah." So he had found out. I said nothing, waiting. "I got a notice from the brokerage this morning," he continued. "They told me the shares were liquidated. Sold. Gone." His voice shook, a mixture of anger and something more fragile, fear, perhaps. "You really did it. You took them back." "They were never yours to begin with," I replied quietly. "They were a gift, and gifts can be revoked when respect is absent." He let out a sharp breath. "I know why you did it. Because of Christmas. Because of Julia's posts. Because we didn't invite you." His words tumbled quickly, as though rehearsed excuses might save him. "Dad, you have to understand. Julia just wanted her parents to feel included. It wasn't meant to hurt you." "It did hurt me," I said. "And you let it happen. You let her erase me in front of my own grandchildren." There was a long silence. I could almost hear the weight of his shame pressing down. Then, to my surprise, he said softly, "You're right." The admission startled me. Daniel had rarely admitted fault, not even as a child. He always had a reason, always someone else to blame. To hear him say the words now shook me more than his anger could have. "I told Julia she went too far," he added quickly. "I told her, we can't keep doing this." "That it's wrong." I did not answer. My silence was heavy, deliberate. Finally, he said, "She'll call you. Tonight. To invite you to dinner. Please come. The kids, they miss you." That last sentence pierced me more deeply than anything else. The children missed me. Not just enjoyed me when I appeared, not just smiled at the gifts, but missed me. That knowledge was enough to sway my decision. "I'll come," I said at last. "But do not think I am blind. I know there will be an argument. If you want me there, then you had better be ready to hear me." "Understood," he murmured. That evening, as promised, the phone rang again. Julia's voice came through, strained and polite. "Mario, we'd love for you to come to dinner tomorrow. 7 o'clock. The children would like to see you." I almost laughed at her effort to sound gracious. Her words were a mask, forced onto her by Daniel's insistence. But behind the falseness, the children's need was real, and that was reason enough. "I'll be there," I replied. The following evening, I stood outside their apartment once more, clutching my cane tightly. I had not brought gifts this time. Tonight was not about surprises or indulgences. Tonight was about confrontation, about truth. When Julia opened the door, her smile was brittle. "Mario, thank you for coming." I nodded, stepping inside. The smell of roasted chicken filled the apartment, mixed with the faint aroma of pine from the still-standing Christmas tree. The table was set carefully, too carefully, as though the performance of hospitality could erase the months of coldness. Clara and Leo were the first to greet me, rushing forward with the unfiltered joy only children can give. "Grandpa!" Leo shouted, hugging my waist. Clara followed, her eyes bright. "We missed you," she whispered fiercely into my coat. Then, pulling back, she lowered her voice even further. "Mom says you're too old to play with us." But that's not true. We know it's not true. I froze, my heart clenching. Out of the mouths of children, the truth is spoken. Julia's efforts to turn them against me had reached their ears, but they resisted. They still believed in me. I looked at them both and smiled. "Don't worry, my darlings. I'm not going anywhere." Daniel entered then, his expression tight but determined. He clasped my shoulder briefly, an awkward attempt at reconciliation. "Dad, glad you came. Let's eat," Julia said quickly, eager to distract from the moment. We sat at the table, the 4 adults and 2 children, the atmosphere thick with unspoken words. The chicken was carved, vegetables passed around, wine poured. Conversation began stiffly, Daniel asking about my health, Julia commenting on the weather. I answered politely but without warmth. It was Clara who broke the silence that truly mattered. "Grandpa," she said suddenly, "why didn't you come for Christmas? We wanted you there." The table fell silent. Julia's hand tightened on her glass. Daniel looked down at his plate. "Because," I said gently, "your parents told me there wasn't enough room. But I see now that wasn't true." Leo frowned. "That's not fair." "There's always room for you, Grandpa." Julia forced a smile. "Sweetheart, we just wanted a quiet holiday." Clara shook her head, stubborn. "No, Mom. You told us Grandpa didn't care about Christmas anymore. But he does. He brought us the train and the telescope and the puppy. You said it was Grandma and Grandpa Ellis, but it wasn't. It was him." Her words cut through the room like a blade. Julia's face flushed crimson, her eyes darting to Daniel, who sat frozen. I met Clara's gaze, my own voice steady. "Yes, my dear. Those gifts were from me. Always from me. And they always will be." Daniel cleared his throat, finally speaking. "Dad, the kids shouldn't be caught in the middle." "They already are," I interrupted sharply. "Not by my doing, but by yours. You let lies fill their ears, and now they are forced to untangle them. They deserve better." The silence that followed was heavy. Julia stared at her plate, her pride wounded. Daniel looked torn, guilt plain in his eyes. Clara and Leo, however, were radiant. They had spoken the truth aloud, and in that truth, they had reclaimed me. Dinner continued, though the tension never lifted. Daniel tried small talk again, but the children ignored it, choosing instead to bombard me with questions about the stars, the train, the puppy. Their loyalty was clear, their affection unshaken. When the meal ended, Julia rose quickly to clear the plates, avoiding my eyes. Daniel lingered, his voice low as he spoke to me. "Dad, I know we've done wrong. I know Julia's posts hurt you. But please, don't cut us out completely. Don't cut the kids out. They need you." I studied him for a long moment. The boy I had raised, the man he had become, they were at war inside him. But for once, I saw honesty there. He knew why I had sold the shares. He knew it was justice. I will never abandon the children, I said firmly. But understand this, Daniel. Respect is not a decoration to be put on when convenient. It is the foundation of family. If you want me here, it must be built again, brick by brick. He nodded slowly, his eyes downcast. When I finally stood to leave, the children clung to me once more. "Come back soon, Grandpa," Leo begged. "I will," I promised. As I stepped out into the cold night, cane tapping against the pavement, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and triumph. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Daniel had admitted the truth. For the first time, Julia had been forced to hear her own children speak against her lies, and for the first time I knew that my place in my grandchildren's hearts was unshakable. The dinner had left a residue of unease, like a storm that passes but leaves the air charged and heavy. Daniel's silence, Julia's flushed anger, and the children's open defense of me, none of it had resolved anything. If anything, it had exposed the cracks in their house so clearly that the whole structure seemed ready to collapse. I expected distance after that night. Perhaps fewer calls, fewer invitations, more polite avoidance. What I did not expect was the sudden involvement of Julia's parents. Until now, they had been distant figures in my life, shadows I heard about in conversation, faces I only saw in photos. I had never had reason to confront them directly. That changed on a cold January afternoon. I was in the garden, clearing snow from the steps, when a black sedan pulled into the drive. Out stepped two figures, George and Margaret Ellis, Julia's parents. They walked briskly, bundled in expensive coats, their expressions hard as stone. "Mario," George said curtly as he reached the porch, "we need to talk." I leaned on my shovel, studying them. "About what?" "About the damage you're causing," Margaret interjected sharply. Her voice was clipped, as though every word were meant to cut. "You've turned Daniel against Julia. You've upset the children, and you've made a fool of yourself with those dramatic stunts, showing up uninvited, throwing gifts around, undermining their authority." I chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. "Is that what you think I did? Undermine them?" Number. I reminded my grandchildren that they still have a grandfather who loves them. "That's not how this works," George snapped. "Families need order. Julia and Daniel are the parents. They decide who is in those children's lives. And if they decide you're not, then you're not." Something inside me bristled. "They are my grandchildren. My blood. You have no right to decide otherwise." Margaret stepped closer, lowering her voice as if speaking a threat in confidence. "Listen carefully, Mario. If you keep pushing, if you keep meddling, we will make sure those children are taken away from you forever. You will never see them again." The words hit me like ice water down my spine. "Are you threatening me?" I asked, my voice low and steady. George smirked. "Call it what you like. We have resources you don't. Influence, lawyers, money. Do you think anyone will believe an old man over us? We'll make it so that you're painted as unstable, unfit to be around children. It won't be hard. You're already halfway there in the eyes of the community, storming into their home with presents, causing scenes." I gripped the shovel so tightly my knuckles whitened. For a moment I considered shouting, unleashing the anger boiling inside me. But instead, a colder thought came. They were arrogant. Too arrogant to realize they had already given me exactly what I needed. Because as George spoke, I had already pressed the small recorder in my coat pocket, a habit I'd developed during my military years and never abandoned. I had clicked it on the moment their sedan pulled up. Every word, every threat was now safely preserved. I let them continue. I even baited them. So, I said slowly, "You try to erase me? You'd lie to my grandchildren, convince them I don't exist?" Margaret's lips curled. "Children believe what we tell them. And right now, they don't need an old man confusing them. They need stability. You had your chance, Mario. Now it's our turn," I nodded, as though defeated. "I see." George patted my shoulder condescendingly. "Be smart. Step aside. Spare yourself the humiliation." With that, they turned and walked back to their car, satisfied they had crushed me. The sedan roared to life and disappeared down the icy road, leaving me standing alone in the snow. But I was not crushed. No, I was strangely calm. For the first time, I had proof. That evening, I sat at my desk, listening to the recording again and again. Their voices were clear, every threat crisp, every word dripping with arrogance. They had no idea they had damned themselves. The question was what to do with it. Part of me wanted to march straight to Daniel's apartment, slam the recorder on the table, and force him to hear the truth. But I knew Julia would twist it, dismiss it, claim I had doctored the sound. Number. The truth needed to be undeniable, public, visible. I thought of the social media posts Julia loved so much, the endless stream of photographs and captions designed to erase me. She believed that platform was her weapon. Very well, I decided. I would use it as mine. I had never been skilled with technology, but I knew enough to post a video. That night, with careful hands, I transferred the recording to my computer, overlaying it with a simple caption. For those who wondered why I was not invited to Christmas, why gifts were misattributed, why lies were spread, listen to Julia's parents in their own words. I uploaded it, my finger hovering for a moment over the final button. Once I pressed it, there would be no going back. But then I thought of Clara whispering, "Mom says you're too old to play with us, but we know it's not true." I thought of Leo hugging me, begging me to return. I pressed the button. The recording went live. The reaction was immediate. Within hours, messages flooded in. Neighbors, acquaintances, even distant relatives reached out. Some expressed shock, others outrage. Esther called me in tears, saying she had never believed Julia's stories but now had proof. The next morning, the recording had spread further. Friends of friends shared it. Old colleagues from my working days contacted me. The words of George and Margaret, cold, arrogant, unmistakable, were echoing everywhere. By the afternoon, even Daniel called. "Dad," he said, his voice strained, "what did you do?" "I told the truth," I replied. "You shouldn't have—" "I shouldn't have what?" I snapped. "Protected myself? Defended my place in my grandchildren's lives? Your wife's parents came to my home and threatened me. They said they would take Clara and Leo away from me forever. You tell me, Daniel, was I supposed to sit quietly and let them?" He was silent. "They showed the world who they are," I continued, "and now the world believes me, not them. For once, Daniel, I am not the one erased." When he spoke again, his voice was lower. The kids heard it too. "Clara asked me why her other grandparents hate you." I didn't know what to say. "Tell her the truth," I said simply. Another silence. Then, softly, he admitted, "They went too far." "Yes," I said. "And so did you, when you let them." He didn't argue. For once, Daniel seemed to understand that the silence he had clung to for so long was no longer possible. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in our town shifted. Julia stopped posting her photos. George and Margaret vanished from public view, avoiding the shops and church where they had once paraded themselves with pride. Neighbors whispered. The arrogance that had shielded them cracked, replaced by shame. I did not gloat. Victory was not sweet, not when it came at the cost of family. But I felt relief, a deep, steady relief, that I was no longer defenseless. Most importantly, Clara and Leo knew the truth. The lies had been exposed before they could take root, and that, more than anything, was what mattered. That Sunday, I sat by the fire, the puppy curled at my feet when a knock came at the door. I opened it to find Daniel standing there, his face tired but sincere. Behind him were Clara and Leo, smiling shyly. "Dad," Daniel said, "we came for dinner." "If you'll have us?" I stepped aside, my heart swelling. "Always." The children rushed in, filling the house with laughter, while Daniel followed more slowly, his eyes heavy with unspoken words. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to hope,